Today's lecture is on return on investment analysis, oftentimes called ROI analysis. What is ROI analysis? Basically, it is the justification, the written justification, that an organization composes and presents to the CFO of the company so that the CFO can make an informed decision about whether or not money should be spent on this proposed business investment. The ROI analysis is compiled in such a way that it allows projects from various different departments around the company to be viewed on a fairly equal playing field, financially speaking, so that the CFO can make the best decisions on behalf of the company about which projects to invest in. It is a list of tangible and intangible benefits that will accrue to the company because of making the investment in the proposed, in our case, IT business system. When we say tangible, we mean benefits that can be measured financially, and there's not a lot of debate about what that particular financial benefit is going to be. For example, if we know that we put a new IT system in and that allows us to reduce our head count in an operation by, say, 3 people, and each of those people, the CFO tells us, costs the company $100,000 a year, and the expected lifetime of the system is 5 years, then the financial benefit of laying off those 3 people is 3 times 100,000 times 5 years, which would be $1.5 million. That becomes a tangible financial benefit of the system. There aren't a lot of people that are going to argue with the math. An intangible benefit is a benefit that people recognize will be a benefit to the company, but it's not always obvious what the financial quantification of that benefit is going to be. For instance, if we put in a new customer service system, a new CRM system, let's say, we can get agreement broadly throughout the company that this is going to increase customer satisfaction, which will result in increased sales, but that's about as far as the agreement goes. After that, trying to put a quantity on how much increased sales is going to happen can cause considerable debate. The more optimistic elements of management may be estimating a dramatic increase in sales, whereas the more conservative elements of management might be more in favor of a much smaller estimate in how much sales will be increased because of increased customer satisfaction. And because that gets into trying to predict things into the future that are very hard to control and therefore predict, it's a risky assessment. And risky assessments are termed intangibles. The other type of intangible that we have listed on the slide are when the financial benefit is not actually a matter of concern. Perhaps a new law has been passed that requires, if you're going to stay in business, that you must do something. An example of that would be Sarbanes-Oxley. If you're a publicly traded company and you're going to stay in business, then you must implement the Sarbanes-Oxley controls. And so there's not a lot of debate about whether or not we're going to do that. We just do it. It's a cost of business decision. So the ROI analysis is a requirement in most of corporate America. It provides the business justification to make the investment in a new IT project. It's a required skill of an IT executive. And it's a cultivated skill by anybody who wants to someday become an IT executive. And ROI analysis is often a non-trivial task. The reason it's non-trivial is usually has to do with trying to put dollar quantification on the intangible parts of the benefits. Now, ROI requires working with the CFO. Okay, basically, the ROI analysis is being done for the CFO. The CFO is the customer, if you will, or the consumer of the ROI analysis. It is the analysis, as we said before, that the CFO needs to be able to make an informed decision, a rational decision, a financially sound decision about whether or not the company should invest in this proposed project. ROI requires working with the business units to identify and quantify the value they anticipate from the IT system. So it's not exclusively going to be done by the IT department in an IT department vacuum. In order for an ROI analysis to be done properly, for at least large systems, you've got to involve the end users or their senior management, as well as the CFO, and oftentimes other key players in the company in developing that ROI analysis. ROI requires the application of tried and true methodologies for determining the numbers that are going to go into the analysis and how that's going to be presented. Most large corporations have standard methodologies for how they do ROI. We are going to do an ROI analysis just as a homework exercise and as part of the lecture here in this two-lecture series on return on investment. That's I've had some students in the past call it ROI on training wheels. It's an example of how an ROI analysis might go together so that we can get a sense for what all the different pieces of the ROI analysis are. This is not intended to be the best way to do an ROI analysis. As I said, your particular corporation will have its own tried and true standard methodologies for doing ROI analysis, and of course you have to abide by those methodologies and follow the prescribed procedures in your company for that. So we're going to talk about this from a theoretical standpoint in that this becomes a way to do ROI analysis, and it's just an exercise that we do here in this class so that we can discuss the various pieces of what goes into an ROI analysis. Now, interestingly enough, good ROI analysis requires measurements both before project approval and after project implementation. Okay, so let's stop and consider this for a moment. It's pretty evident why we would want to do measurements before project approval. We want to do measurements to help justify whatever the financial benefits are that we're anticipating from the project. And that's going to go into a statement on projected return on investment. So again, the CFO will have some sense for how good a business investment this is supposed to be. So then we ask the question, why would we do measurements after the project gets implemented? And how is that going to be part of an ROI study? Well, these after deployment measurements oftentimes are called post-project audits. And why do we want to do a post-project audit? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, we thought we were going to get a certain financial benefit from the project. We want to measure and find out, did we? If we did get that financial benefit, or even better than the estimate was in the ROI analysis, then IT looks like a hero in the rest of the company's eyes. You ought to know that. You ought to. in the rest of the company's eyes. You ought to know that. You ought to use that information to build political capital for IT's executive management so that they can have the influence that they need at critical periods in the future to make sure that the company's best interests are served by what IT can do for it. Let's ask the question on the other side of that, though. What if you measure the actual return that you get from the project and it falls below what was projected? Why is that a good thing to know then? Well, certainly at that point, there is the possibility that IT's credibility could be in some degree undermined and that political capital could be eroded and that IT's ability to function as a key influential player in the company's future could be in some ways diminished. However, responsible executives figure out when things are not going as they thought they would go and figure out what to do to fix them. And so a post-project audit that reveals that the reality falls somewhat short of the projection, we can now go back and figure out, well, where did we mess up? Where did we make our mistakes? And how do we correct those mistakes so that we don't make those same mistakes again in the future? By going through that process, even in a visible way, such that it's visible to the rest of the company, that process all by itself will help to bolster the credibility of IT. The absolute worst thing that you could do is try and sweep it under the rug and pretend we don't have a problem, pretend we didn't fall short of the projection, hope everybody will forget about this, because really they won't. And then it's going to look like not only does IT not deliver, but they don't know how to function in a proactive way to identify and fix problems. And that is probably the most damaging thing that could happen in undermining the credibility of a CIO and his staff. So doing a post-project audit needs to be part of what you're going to be doing when you do a return on investment analysis. So we talked about this. ROI produces the business justification to fund an IT project. No responsible CFO can allow you to proceed without one. See, it's not a matter of the CFO's being a bad guy and we've got to tell him a story so that he'll let us have the money that we need to fund IT and allow IT to continue to live in a manner to which it has been accustomed in the past. That is not what's going on here. The CFO is responsible for the profitability of the company. That is the primary metric of the CFO's success. The CFO is the one that has to make the decision whether or not this money should be invested in this project or the next project or no project at all. The CFO needs the information to make an informed decision. And the stockholders, the board of directors, the CEO, the other CXOs in the company, other CFOs in other companies, all these people will be wondering why the CFO is not proceeding in a rational way if the CFO doesn't have fairly thorough ROI analysis upon which to make his or her decision. So it's a non-negotiable requirement in the professional responsibilities of most CFOs. They've got to have ROI analyses, at least for the major funding decisions. And an IT project competes with other corporate projects for limited funding. Without an ROI analysis, there's no rational basis for comparison. So just in the same way that you never have enough money to do all the different things that you want to do in a given month. You'd always like to buy a new car, or add to the house, go on a vacation, whatever your dream lists are, and there's always not enough money to do everything you wished you could do in your personal life. Well, the same is true in a corporate life. The COO has a whole set of projects that she would like to get funded. The CMO has new marketing campaigns that he would like to get funded. The VP of Sales has new sales strategies and programs and efforts and incentives that he would like to get funded. And on it goes around the company. And by the time you add all that up, the desire is for far more money for new projects than is available. The CFO knows what's available, and so the CFO has to now prioritize these requests for funding from all the different departments around the corporation. And certainly politics plays a role in that, but there is a strong, rational fiscal basis for those decisions also. And the ROI analyses from all different parts of the company help provide the CFO with that information. But it's important to realize that when IT is doing an ROI analysis, that they're competing for funding. It's not just a matter of, is this project going to come in above the hurdle rate? And if it does, therefore, we get it funded. But a lot of times it's how far above the hurdle rate did this one come compared to the other projects that are looking for funding from other parts of the company. So we see that all CIOs must be able to produce credible ROI analyses. Now, the CIO himself or herself is not the one producing the ROI analysis, of course. The CIO is going to task somebody subordinate to him or her to do that ROI analysis. And then, of course, that CIO wants to review it, may want to have input into it, may want to tweak it once that study is on his or her desk. But the CIO himself or herself is not really the one doing the analysis. So who is? You are, very likely. I mean, if you work for a CIO, sooner or later, you'll be part of a team putting together an ROI analysis for a new IT project. So all IT directors of larger companies must be able to produce credible ROI analyses. And everybody who wants to be one of those folks, an IT director or a CIO, needs to know how to do these things. And so we address them here in this course. We introduce the concepts. We go through a little exercise to help you understand the kinds of thinking that goes into an ROI analysis. But again, after having completed this part of the course on ROI analysis, you would have to then acquaint yourself with whatever the methodologies and policies are for your individual corporations, whatever the company is you work for, the way they do this, and become skilled in that methodology. So we see that ROI analyses are pushed all the way down to the project manager level in most IT departments. So we then recognize that being good at producing ROI analyses is a cultivated skill by IT professionals. And IT professionals, if they aren't responsible for producing the analysis, certainly if they're in IT very long, will have opportunity to participate as part of the team putting together these studies. IT professionals need to speak the language of ROI. What does that mean? Well, if we're talking about the internal rate of return for a project, you need to know what that means. That's got to not be a foreign term, and we will define that here in the lecture. You certainly need to understand intangible benefits versus tangible benefits, how to define those, how to tell which one's which. You need to have some definition of what we mean when we say ROI analysis. There are various and sundry different equations and methodologies for computing ROI. And there's a whole set of vocabulary that goes along with doing ROI analyses, and we're going to talk about a lot of that in the next hour and a half. And we're going to talk about a lot of that in the next hour and a half of these lectures, and then you'll see that also in your homework and on the exam. And so becoming familiar with the vocabulary of ROI analyses is an important thing to do. And then IT professionals need to be familiar with at least some methodology of doing these, and we will present a methodology here in this lecture series. Okay. As we've said before, ROI analyses are non-trivial in most cases. They contain two parts, besides, of course, the cost part, but under the benefits part, two types of benefits, tangible and intangible. And this realization that benefits are not benefits unless the other executives in the company are in agreement with you, that those are the expected benefits of the project. Now, if that starts to speak of political communications and a political process, you're getting the right idea. ROI analyses for very large funded projects, and large is always relative to whatever the revenue stream is for a particular company, but an expenditure that's very large relative to the budget for the company, those are always going to be political processes as well as financial processes. And the political part of that is, for the most part, being skilled in communicating your analysis to other people in the company and getting other key players in the company and getting those key influential decision makers throughout the company at the VP level or the CXO level to agree with you that yes, your analysis seems reasonable for this particular project. Now, when we're talking about tangible benefits, we need an accepted methodology for analysis. We need measurements. We need a plan for validating your measurements. The benefiting business units can usually help with this a great deal. And if you haven't had a lot of experience in involving the business units in this, they can help probably more than you would expect them to be able to help. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, if they're going to be the users of the system, they probably have a better sense for what the impact of that system is going to do, and then how to quantify the business value of that impact. And then, of course, the CFO has to approve all your numbers and conclusions. If the CFO doesn't agree, then you don't have numbers and conclusions. Now we get to the intangibles. Now, unfortunately for us in the IT world, oftentimes it's the intangibles that carry the decision to fund the project. What that means is usually the benefiting users can often help. As we said with tangible benefits, that will be true with intangible benefits. The justification for these should usually be very short and non-technical. Let's admit to ourselves that oftentimes trying to put dollar signs against intangible benefits makes us nervous. We don't like guessing wildly in the dark, and that's the way it seems to be sometimes when we try and put dollar figures against intangible benefits. And so we have some words of wisdom here from Jack Keane in an article entitled "Don't Ignore the Intangibles." Jack says that even benefits that are hard to quantify can be an important part of a successful business case. And as we said, almost always they are. When it comes to adding muscle to business cases, there's an unjustified fear of measuring what are considered intangible benefits. But a more astute handling of intangibles, those goals that can't be easily measured in dollar terms, can provide a big boost to the justification for the project. Now, some opening thoughts here. more than 25% of the value of enterprises is now based on intangible assets. Intangibles such as brand image, such as market share. Unfortunately, when business cases are devoid of intangible analysis, projects vital to the enterprise go unfunded. In other words, if we underestimate the potential benefit of an intangible, because we don't want to risk overestimating that, we already talked about why that's a bad idea, but if we grossly underestimate that benefit, then we may not have enough benefit to get the IT project funded. Remember, it's competing with other projects throughout the rest of the corporation for funding. And that might have been a very important project. And had we done a better job at accurately estimating the intangible benefits, we would have gotten a clearer picture of why this is important to the business. And so we continue on here with this quote from Jack Keane: strategically marginal projects showing a high ROI, often because the investment is small, get the money. Such misguided project investments can undermine critical strategic goals such as improvement of market share and sharpening of competitive advantage. All right, so there are three dangerous myths that we need to address here. One is that intangibles always remain so. Another is that intangibles have no worth. Again, these are lies. And good decisions consider only the facts. So let's address each of these three. The first, using building blocks to convert intangibles to tangibles. We have a premise, a formula, certain metrics, and then good old-fashioned common sense to address dangerous myth number one. Okay, 75% of the intangibles cited in business cases could have been and probably should have been converted to tangibles. Now, Jack Keane says after system deployment, but oftentimes this can be done before system deployment. And so we ask the question, how? Well, follow the data. If you projected an increase in sales of 2% because of this new IT customer service system that IT is going to develop and install, you should be able to measure that after the fact. Did we in fact see a 2% increase in sales? Asking those who know. A lot of times people who are out using the system, interfacing with the customers, will have insights about the benefits to the system, things that ought to be measured that maybe you never even thought about measuring. And then find the causes of silence. Why are people not expressing their needs? Why are corporate solutions going unused? Dangerous myth number two, intangibles have no worth. Many things in our economic life are both highly valuable and quite intangible. What is the value of the Coca-Cola logo? Well, let me just ask you a question. Let's say that you somehow got the rights from Coca-Cola to use its secret formula for making Coke, but not its logo. And so you built your own bottling plant, and you made lots of cans or bottles of your cola, which tasted exactly like Coca-Cola, and then you tried to take that into the marketplace. What do you think? Are people going to buy your cola as often as Coca-Cola, even if you sell it for half or a third the price of Coca-Cola? The answer is no. Coca-Cola is going to continue to maintain very close to their market share, even though somebody else has a product that tastes identically the same, costs 1/3 the amount as a can of Coca-Cola, and that's because the logo, the brand image, has got huge value in the marketplace. People value that logo. And how is that a tangible? That's that logo. And how is that a tangible? That's not a tangible, although if you think about it, what's the market cap of Coca-Cola? Look at the number of outstanding shares times the dollar amount per share. Multiply that out. That's the market capitalization for the Coca-Cola Corporation. And now you subtract out all of the intangible assets that Coca-Cola has, which, by the way, are not significant compared to its market cap. And the difference is going to be the intangible, but now measurable value of the Coca-Cola brand image. And so we see that there are ways to go about measuring intangibles. Another one here is Walmart's image with Wall Street. What happens to Walmart stock if all of a sudden Walmart has to go through a very public and embarrassing foray with people who bring suit against it for the way it doesn't properly treat its employees or its customers or whatever. That, of course, is fictional, but we have seen such events happen in the past, and the stock takes a major hit. And so the perception on the part of Wall Street and the folks who value the stock has a huge impact on the actual value of Walmart as a corporation. And that goodwill and that good PR, what's that worth? Well, it's worth the difference in the stock price when it's good compared to the stock price when it's bad, which turns out to be billions and billions of dollars. Those are intangible benefits, but there is a way to measure those intangibles. And then factors with an important worth should be central to a business case, even if they aren't easily quantified. Let's look at dangerous myth number 3. Good decisions consider only the facts. People who claim their decisions are made solely on the facts are expressing hope and not reality. What do you think? Is that true? A core skill of senior managers is the ability to make the right decisions in the face of less than factual, for example, intangible information. The only issue then is whether at the time of decision making, the use of intangibles is going to be hidden under the table or brought into the light of day. So, using building blocks to convert intangibles to tangibles. Building block number 1, avoid controversial premises entirely. An example here would be, instead of saying something like, by using this new system, we will lead our industry in innovation. That's a little hard to quantify. That could be viewed by a lot of people as clearly an overstatement. And it might be better instead to use wording like, we will improve our ability to innovate, which will help us achieve a better competitive position in the industry. That would be less controversial. Building block number 2, look for other formulas related to the same benefit area. For example, suppose a formula that calculates the value of customer satisfaction based on increased gross revenue is in the business case. If that's too uncertain, try looking at a formula to calculate savings based on a reduction in customer turnover, computing the higher expense of replacing a lost customer. And if that's not justifiable again, look at how similar systems have impacted other companies. Certainly the vendors that want to sell you these systems will have those kinds of company contacts. Find a company that's as similar to yours as you can with the same sort of impacts that you're expecting and find out what was their measured benefit after implementation. So there's lots of places you can go to find various different estimates for what the dollar value of intangibles is going to be. And that's actually fairly common in all parts of the business. Everybody else in the corporation's been doing that since dirt got invented, and it just seems that IT has an unnormal reticence to participate in that game. Building block number 3, metrics. Be creative at finding sources for information. Interview customers, employees, partners, suppliers, and industry analysts. Search for internet studies and other studies that maybe the vendor could provide you. The reality is that informed guesstimates, not facts, drive much of industry's success. Let's take a minute and look at a CIO's guide to the strengths and weaknesses of ROI calculations. We're going to look at some thoughts about ROI naysayers. We're going to take a look at the future of ROI for senior IT people. Look at some soft side trends for ROI, and then talk about establishing a projects office that will help us with these ROI methodologies. First of all, let's look at what we mean when we say some ROI naysayers. There's no ROI in analyzing the ROI on everything. What do we mean when we say that? Well, it can take a great deal of effort to do an ROI study. I mean, if you add up all the money and time that goes into doing a full-blown ROI analysis, it might be $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 to do one of those. Now, that's an investment in making good decisions. It's time and money well spent. If you're thinking of spending $1 million on something, it makes a ton of sense to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to make sure that you're investing that million in the right place. But if you were talking about an IT expenditure of, say, $5,000, where would the sense be in doing an ROI study to figure out whether or not that $5,000 investment made any sense? It wouldn't be. I mean, below some threshold level that will be established in your corporation, spending decisions will just be based on the good judgment of management. And no ROI analysis would be or should be done for expenditures below some minimum level. And then the best, most innovative IT improvements have no ROI. That's a true statement. There's no decent ROI on installing the first weighing word processors in the 70s. People didn't have a way to do that. I mean, all a weighing word processor did was make a typewritten document nicer looking. I mean, that was all they did initially. I lived through those eras. I understood that. I was part of the organizations that scratched their heads and going, why do we want to get word processors? I mean, we have secretaries with typewriters. All we're going to do by getting a word processor is being able to produce a cleaner, nicer looking document. It wasn't until after we'd had word processors for a while that we started getting a feel for all of the benefits that word processing would do for us that a typewriter couldn't do. But those are things we couldn't see up front. Spreadsheets were the same sort of thing. When spreadsheets first came out, they were fun toys, and people were using them for lots of interesting different things, but it wasn't clear what the business value of spreadsheets were. VisiCalc was a type of spreadsheet. ROI models sometimes fail because of complexity. So you can be too simplistic in putting together an ROI model, and you won't have enough data to make an informed decision. But you can make the mistake by going too far in the other direction. You can put together too complex of an ROI study. You have to remember that an ROI justification oftentimes, as we've said, is based on intangibles, and intangibles, as we have said, oftentimes is based on tangibles, as we have said, oftentimes is based on gross estimates. of what the dollar benefit might be for some particular recognized benefit. And once you realize that you're talking about gross estimates that maybe are accurate to plus or minus 50%, and sometimes that's even good to get that close, why would it make any sense to go into great detail on the cost side or on the tangible benefits side if you know that the decision is going to be swung primarily based on intangibles and those estimates are not very accurate at all? And then let's talk a little bit about the future of ROI for IT. Bruce Barlag, president of Hackett Group, has said that CIOs will find their compensation directly linked to ROI. In other words, a CIO is going to have part of his or her compensation computed based on the magnitude of the ROI that is being projected for new IT projects, as well as the post-deployment audit revealed accuracy of those ROI projections. And why would Bruce Barlag of the Hackett Group say such a thing? Why would he make such a prediction about the future? The answer is because in some industries, they're already doing that. And so that's not even future in some places. But the trend is expected to spread to nearly all industries. And then CIOs and vendors will begin to truly collaborate on ROI analysis and tie vendor compensation to achieving financial returns. Now there's an interesting thing, that the vendor will be paid based at least partly, but significantly, on whether or not the promised ROI was actually delivered. And then David Axon, the managing director of the Hackett Group, says Wall Street analysts, rating agencies, and banks will begin using an evaluation of IT ROI as they determine a company's viability, its future prospects, the credibility of its forecasts, and its ability to deliver customer and shareholder value. We will find a way to close the gap between projected ROI and actual ROI and track it in near real time. So the picture that we get here is as important as doing good ROI analyses have been in the past. It's going to become even more important in the future. As important as it's been for IT professionals to understand how to do ROI analyses in the past, it's going to become even more important for them in the future. And tools and methodologies will be developed so that ROI can be tracked in real time. We can get a much clearer picture as we move along into exactly what the benefit is for a particular project. Then let's talk a little bit here about the soft side trends for ROI. By the year 2007, which is probably about the time that may not be the future for some of you who are seeing this presentation, 90% of companies will budget for the cost of culture change and factor that into the ROI equation. Companies will no longer turn a blind eye to having billions of dollars worth of technology sitting unused in closets due to adoption resistance by people in the company. When it comes to calculating benefits, chief financial officers have been assessing tangible and intangible benefits for years, but it's made an issue only by IT folks and consultants who know little about finance. During the next few years here, we'll see finance departments mandating a common structure and consistency when assessing benefits. If you're an IT person today, dig out your old finance textbooks and start reading. And then as a closing thought here to the lecture, we have lectures coming up in the future in this course that will talk explicitly about project management offices. And so we'll explore that in much greater detail later in the course. But for right now, let's consider what the benefit of a project management office might have in this whole business of ROI analyses. Specifically, a project management office would work to eliminate project redundancies, standardize the delivery processes, assess and communicate ROI. Again, the communication across the whole company is an important aspect of doing good ROI analysis, and avoiding the latest, greatest syndromes. And then project offices will include managers from multiple business units, project specialists, and then project analyst that does the ROI calculation. So you will begin to develop specialists within the corporation. Their only job is doing ROI calculations and analyses. And so you would expect that they would become very experienced and very proficient at this, and that the slop or the error, so to speak, in the process would continue to be reduced as time progresses. And then project office funding usually pays for itself with savings and improved communications. Again, we'll talk about that later in this course. Now let's take a brief look at why technology ROI models usually fail. There are 3 reasons why simply using ROI will not result in cost-effective, high-performance technology environments. The first, which we've really already touched on, is people aren't peripherals. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute here. Overall system complexity isn't free. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail here in a minute. And people don't know what they don't know about the future. So people aren't peripherals. Oftentimes ROI models do not include the cost of gaining eventual user acceptance. So what does it take to ensure that an IT project is going to have eventual end user acceptance? Well, there are tried and true methodologies and strategies for doing that. That doesn't have to be a risky part of the project, but in order for it to not be a risky part of the project, it has to be addressed explicitly and budgeted for. There's special training, there's special PR, advertising. I mean, there's a way to do that takes the mystery out of it and makes it very predictable, and you can guarantee end user acceptance, or virtually guarantee end user acceptance. But it's something that has to be planned for and budgeted for by people who know what they're doing. And then an example here is Salesforce automation tools. It's not useful if it's not used by everyone. It's not trusted by salespeople. If it's not trusted by salespeople, it won't be useful. And if it's not used by sales management, it won't be useful. And so all of those are things that would have to be explicitly addressed in a project proposal and budgeted for as part of the cost of the project. Reason number 2, overall system complexity isn't free. The accumulation of many small projects, each carefully cost justified, becomes a giant hairball of manageability and expense. And those are the kinds of expenses that weren't considered in the ROI analyses for the individual projects. So how do you address this challenge? Well, there are standard ways to do that. Certainly having an enterprise IT architecture and addressing it from the perspective of standardization, simplicity, addressing costs of proliferation, streamlining maintenance. I mean, those are all aspiration. Streamlining maintenance. I mean, those are all aspects that have to be considered as part solutions to that problem. And then reason number 3, people don't know what they know. Some fascinating thoughts here. 10 years ago, how would you have guessed the outcome of email and ERP? Well, let's take ourselves back to the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, as ERP started to become more than just a pipe dream on somebody's drawing board, but large corporations began to implement ERP systems, there were 2 things that were grossly misunderstood about ERP. One was that it would take, on an average, 7 years to implement an enterprise-wide ERP system. That was much, much longer than was anticipated when these efforts first began. Very long implementations like that draw out the costs and reduce the benefits. And so that had significant negative impact on the ROI of ERP systems. But we didn't know that in the mid-90s. We didn't know that it would be that complicated. The other thing is that the actual benefit that's created by ERP systems is not as dramatic as was initially envisioned. And so we were way wrong in grossly overestimating the impact of ERP systems, especially for very large corporations. That's not to say that ERP systems still aren't valuable things to do in many cases for many corporations, but today when we talk about rolling out an ERP system, its scope enterprise-wide usually is considerably lessened from what was envisioned back in the mid-90s, because we've learned some lessons about where you don't put ERP, and the estimates on what the ROI of this is going to be usually is considerably lessened, because we know it's going to take a lot longer to roll out and start to experience those benefits than we thought back in the mid-90s. But let's talk about email. I was also around to think about email back in the mid-90s. I was running a company at the time, and my senior vice president came to me and said, we need to put an email system in the company. Now, you got to remember, the world was just a whole lot different in the early 90s, mid-90s than it is today. Most companies did not have email. And the initial implementation of our email system was only going to be used inside the company. We wouldn't even be using it to communicate with customers, because most of our customers didn't have email. We wouldn't be using it to communicate with our partners, because most of our partners didn't have email. And so there was a real question in my mind: why should we spend the money to put email in to allow folks in our company to send email back and forth to each other when they could always pick up the telephone, talk on the intercom, or meet with each other in a conference room? It wasn't clear to me why email had any ROI at all. And if the truth be known, the only reason that I agreed to fund email for our company at that particular time was I would have had a revolt on my hands by my subordinate executives, who said, no, we see a lot of at least time savings and productivity improvements that will accrue to us because people won't need to be interrupted until they're ready to be interrupted. And that made a little bit of sense to me, made a lot of sense to them, and so we put email in. So I was one of the cast of thousands out there in senior management in the mid-90s going, why do we need email? You have to remember another interesting thing. In the mid-90s, managers didn't know how to type. So, I mean, who was going to be writing the email? Those are interesting challenges that we had to face. Now, our culture looks back now, and email probably is the number one most valuable IT system in existence in most corporations. I mean, take away my telephones, take away my databases, take away all kinds of things, but don't take away my email. And we didn't see that. And so this is an example of people don't know what they know. So A lot of times trying to put dollar values on the intangibles can be tricky, even if you can't, especially if you can't identify which intangible benefits need to have dollar signs next to them. In conclusion then, when you think about ROI analysis, you need to think longer term, second, third, and fourth order benefits and costs. You need to not underestimate the benefits of simple standards and flexibility. You need to not underestimate the costs of managing the complexity. And you need to not fail to have a plan for and commitment to full end user acceptance. Thank you very much.